and I go to bed quite early as well. I don't mind recording, Galamjan, that's fine.
Thanks.
Again, thanks so much. This is a really fantastic initiative, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to support you. I did want to say that we have a vibrant Central Asian community here in Australia, in the
Mhm.
Australian academia. So if you need recommendations of my colleagues from Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, um, I don't think I know anyone from Kyrgyzstan, please let me know. And yeah, I must say, I think I met people from Turkmenistan in Australia for the very first time in my life. So that was quite an experience. Yeah. So I've prepared some slides because Galamjan insisted that people are gonna like slides. So let me share my screen. Right. So Galamjan's already kindly introduced me, and yes, so my name is Asiel. I'm a lecturer in public policy and public administration at the University of Sydney. I'm also a director of the Executive Master of Public Administration, and this is important because in Australian academia, traditional academic appointments are called 40-40-20 appointments, meaning that 40% of my time is spent on research, 40% is spent on teaching, and 20% on service. And so the directorship of this Executive Master of Public Administration degree is 20% of my service. So I do tend to emphasize that this is an important part of my job. And I will talk about that a bit later. So the topic of my talk today is building a better government and lessons from public policy research. Although broadly, I will share about my career journey, how I got to where I am today, some key reflections on that journey I've undertaken. I will try and talk a little bit about academic culture, both in Singapore and in Australia, where I've worked, studied and worked, or am working at the moment. I will also talk about public policy research and, from my point of view and my experience, how it compares across the three countries where I lived and worked, so Australia, Kazakhstan, and Singapore. And then I'll talk about my current research project, hopefully of interest to some of you if this is also your area of research. So I grew up in Kustanai, which is a relatively, I actually don't know, small or big, relatively big by Kazakhstan standards, city, regional center in Kazakhstan in the very north. I did my schooling, so I went to high school in Kostanay, but I then went to the UK for a year to do my A levels, which is sort of like the final year in our schools in Kazakhstan, because Kostanay and this metropolitan area in the UK called Kirklees borough, they had a twinning agreement which no longer exists, I don't think, but it ran for about 13 or 15 years, and I was one of the high school students from Kustanay who actually was lucky enough to be selected to go there for a year, stay with a local family, do my A levels, and then coming back from that was a fundamentally important experience for me, and I think it shaped my future journey in a lot of meaningful ways, from personal to professional. After that, I came back to Kazakhstan and I applied for the Bolashak scholarship. That was the first year when Bolashak offered undergraduate studies funding. So I went back to the UK, did my undergraduate studies at the University of York. I did politics and social policy as my undergraduate degree. And then you probably all know that the Bolashak scholarship has a bond of 5 years. So I came back to Kazakhstan, and then I worked at the Agency for Civil Service Affairs from 2009 to 2015. Reflecting on that journey, it was very um, transformational for me, and I do think, and I hope that's not still the case. I do think that studying overseas as a young person from Kazakhstan, changes you in a lot of different ways, including maybe some of your value systems and worldviews. And so when you come back to Kazakhstan, it can be quite difficult to adjust back. And so I did find that quite stark. It was a stark contrast, essentially. So having worked for 6 years in Kazakhstan, I decided that it was time to move on. as part of my employment with the civil service affairs agency, I was given a lot of opportunities. I was supported quite a lot by the senior leadership, and so my initiatives were generally met with enthusiasm. I was part of the team that authored the law on civil service, which was then being updated, and then as well as several presidential decrees on performance management training of civil servants, and so on, and rotation and things like that. But then, as I said, I think that internal feeling that something was not quite right and that I wasn't quite where I should be, it persisted. And then that coincided with some very negative experience with new leadership, which happened around the time that the Agency for Civil Service Affairs was merged with the Anti-Corruption Agency. And I decided it was time for me to go and do a master's degree. Having said that, I never thought that I would leave the country and never come back. I left Kazakhstan in 2015. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to come back and visit properly. And I do not quite envision maybe coming back and living in Kazakhstan for a while because my life is in Australia now. But as I said, I think that experience of studying overseas as a young person does change you quite a lot. And I did find that it affected how I saw things, and especially my role in changing quite a few things that I thought needed changing in the country. I digress. I went to Singapore. I completed a master in public policy at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. I worked as a research assistant for one of the professors there at the same time. I also had a part-time job with the United Nations Development Program. And I decided that research was interesting. And so I applied for a PhD program. My PhD is from Nanyang Technological University, not from NUS. So it's a different university in Singapore. So I completed in 2021. I worked as a researcher at another university. So I did a round of all the universities in Singapore. So from 2021 to 2023, I worked at SUTD as a research fellow at the another Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities. And then after that, I secured this tenure track position at the University of Sydney in 2023, where I've been working ever since. So I just wanted to say a few things for people who might be interested, because I know that some of you may be considering Singapore or Australia for a higher education degree, for an HDR, as we call it here, for a PhD, or what have you, even for as a destination for employment. So in Singapore, where I received my doctorate, there was a very high expectation of intensive publication outputs. I had about 9 articles when I graduated from my PhD, which of course set me up for success after, but that was extremely grueling, and it was just generally a point of anxiety for me. There's an emphasis on quantitative research, and just generally, having arrived in Australia, I realized how little I know about research paradigms other than positivism. Like, for example, I knew nothing about critical social theory, which is extremely important to be aware of in Australia because of the research culture here. And overall, the approach to knowledge and scholarship generally in Singapore is quite pragmatic. If it's useful, it's good. If it's not useful and not going to change things in a tangible way, then maybe not so good. So when I arrived in Australia, I did experience somewhat of a culture shock, or academic culture shock, if I may call it that. It's a much more relaxed and inward-looking culture, which is concerned about how things are done here rather than how things are done everywhere else. And so, for example, for the longest time, Australia didn't even have a proper public administration curriculum, because public administration is very much an American discipline, maybe European to a certain extent. And so Australian universities would teach public policy, but not public administration in a very American sort of sense. The emphasis is very much on mixed methods, and quite a few researchers are doing qualitative work, and they're not ashamed of it. Books are highly valued. As I said, there's rich exposure to a variety of research paradigms, such as critical social theory, interpretivism, again, something I wasn't quite aware of in Singapore. Knowledge is seen as something that will empower you and give you instruments to influence the decision making in the country. People are extremely protective of their personal time. But of course, still the system is very competitive, and government funding of research is especially competitive. So that's the Australian system. I don't know, for those who are interested, Australia has a slightly different system of academic ranks. It starts with a lecturer, which is sort of like an assistant professor equivalent to an American system, in an American system. It's very similar to a British system. Then senior lecturer, then associate professor, and then full professor. And so I try not to do that thing where on LinkedIn I write lecturer, parenthesis, assistant professor. If you don't know what a lecturer is in Australia, that's fine by me. So some of my colleagues do that, but I can't be bothered. So I'm at a starting position, which is lecturer. And then one of these days, hopefully I will apply for a senior lecturer, and then we'll see from there on. So my research is on mostly, as Galamjan mentioned, on who works for the government, why they work for the government, what makes them choose employment in the government, and how to change their behaviors and motivations in a way that can help create public value for the citizens. And so I'm interested in motivations of public servants, how to make them more engaged with their work, how to offset job demands and create more job resources. I recently started taking more interest in integrity and ethical behavior. Because I do a lot of public policy teaching, I started looking into policy advisory systems. And so my colleague Sultanat Janyanova and I co-authored an article last year on Kazakhstan, which was about the policy advisory systems in Kazakhstan. And my current research program is on empathy and emotions in government work, which is, I must say, emotions in government work is all the rage right now. So I'm just jumping on the bandwagon there. All right, so some key reflections on sort of the career journey. And again, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. I do always say that it is important that people know you. And I found that especially as someone who graduated from a university in Singapore. And Singapore is a great country, and it was probably one of my favorite places to live. The people are amazing. I was supported so much. The government funded my research, etc. But it was still quite difficult to position myself as a competitive hire, having graduated from a university in Singapore, not in America, not in Europe, not in Australia, but in Singapore, right? And so attending academic conferences, talking to people, emailing people, asking them questions was really important so that they actually tried and remembered my name. But what I do find is it's really easy to tell when somebody's talking to you because they want something from you, because they want to say, oh, are there any jobs at your university? Or can you give me a recommendation? So it is important to talk to people because you think they are interesting, not because, they're useful in some way. I also found that overseas, especially in Australia, if you ask people for things, they will give them to you. Just ask. So if you want an introduction, if you want somebody to co-author or look at your article, at a draft of your article, give you feedback, have a look at your grant application, they will give you feedback. Even if they don't know you, they will be quite generous with their time. And so I found that I was pleasantly surprised. And so I keep telling my master and PhD students that you should ask people for things. Don't be afraid to do that. I would say that you always have to be open to, that's probably very trite, open to drastic changes in your career path, turn any experience that you have into an asset. So, for example, obviously the wealth of experience I had in the government was an asset in my research, as well as some networks I've created. But also, nothing is really worth risking your health or personal relationships for. So you really have to ring fence your personal time and protect your health first and foremost. On research, I think, again, the experience so far since I've graduated from my PhD, you do need to know how to explain your research in very simple terms. This is also a skill that helped me in compiling grant applications, because lots of people who review grant applications have no idea what you are talking about in your field, because they will be general assessors rather than detailed assessors, first and foremost. Publishing strategically, yes, it's great, but maintaining motivation at the same time can be quite a difficult balance. And so I would say in the beginning, yes, you might need to accept quite a few invitations to publish, but once you've had, once you've established a working pipeline, you kind of need to shift from an intensive output and start thinking about what do you really want to write about intrinsically rather than because you need it on your CV. Switching off is really hard. I can't do it still, even though I have a family. And so I constantly think about my work, and sometimes my eyes sort of glaze over. And then my husband would ask me, "Are you thinking about your work?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." So it's a skill. Depending on the academic culture, talking about yourself and telling everyone how great your research is and how many skills you have is useful. I found this in Australia. I never talk about myself. People here talk about themselves all the time. And so at first I thought, okay, this is weird. But then I realized it's just the culture. People do that. And then, especially as a woman, if you don't do that, then people will just not notice you as much. Right. And still, it does help to be a nice person because in especially in countries like Australia, the community is quite small. And then if you're not nice to say people who are junior to you, if you're rude, if you're conceited, people will notice that, and the words will travel. So it's nice to be nice. It pays to be nice. I will just briefly talk about my impression of doing research in public policy and public administration in 3 countries, very briefly, because Galamjan, you feel free to share these slides if you want to, and the talk is recorded as well. So I found that okay, so I've lived in 2 authoritarian countries, and that's Singapore and Kazakhstan. Having said that, I didn't do research in Kazakhstan when I was living there, but I did do research on Kazakhstan since I moved away. And so, of course, the contrast is quite jarring. So in Australia, the emphasis in public policy research is on citizen participation and empowerment. So, for example, academics are invited to participate in policy consultations. There are such things as mini publics, which are very new developments in deliberative democracy when citizens are gathered in sort of a panel and they're given a problem to deliberate, and then they come up with a specific decision on a certain policy. And sometimes that decision is binding and sometimes it's not. So it depends on the policy settings, but that's sort of the new that those are the new developments in how to make democracy work better. Civil society organizations here are extremely strong policy actors, and they're very skilled in lobbying and advocacy. Public servants are experts and are highly employable across different sectors, and they are expected to give frank and fearless advice to politicians. That's an actual expression that is being used a lot. However, recently there's been a trend towards politicization of employment, where sometimes ministers would employ people based on their connections rather than based on merit, but that's a very recent trend. And then academics who write, who research, who produce research on government can be highly critical, and that's okay. And nothing's going to happen to them. So my experience in Singapore and Kazakhstan is sort of very different. In Singapore, public servants are also very well qualified and well paid, but what that means is that they do their own research. They're not interested in engaging with academia unless that research is producing some very technocratic solutions, and so mostly science-based, or they maintain the strong technocratic reputation of the government. As an example, when I worked at SUTD, we got a massive grant. It was like 1 million Singapore dollars on how to encourage career transitions of Singaporeans whose skills are suddenly out of date. And so the government can do that research themselves. They have all the data that they don't share with anyone, but they really wanted to show that this is something they highly value and want to invest money in. And so they gave us the money and we did that research for them. And I really doubt that they used the findings for anything. They just needed to show that this is something they put money into. And civil society is only allowed participation if it does not threaten the ruling party. But if it does, the consequences can be quite dire. And I've seen that those examples, especially in academia, highly critical academics found themselves without a job or not given tenure. And so they would be forced to move away and write the critical things about Singapore from somewhere else. So my research experience with Kazakhstan from outside is that the engagement with academics can be quite narrow, or it can be on technocratic issues that, again, do not threaten the integrity of the regime. So on things like economic policy, maybe highly specific areas of education policy. But if it's anything to do with democratic innovation or social values, then there's very deep suspicion of independent researchers and independent civil society organizations. And from what I've seen, the invitations to citizens to provide policy input are not genuine and they're not meaningful, because usually what happens is such participation is carefully planned and managed, or it's the seeds of what needs to be decided have already been planted. So that's the impression I got having spoken to the people whom we interviewed for the article that I mentioned before with Sultanat Janina, that was published in Policy and Society last year. So my current research project, and this is where I will finish and open the floor to questions. My current research project is on empathy in government work. And so I work very closely with the state government of New South Wales on this, the state where Sydney is located, because Australia is a federation, so it has several states and territories. And so I live in New South Wales, and I have a relationship with the trade union for public servants here. And we collaborated in order to understand how public servants use empathy in their work. And then I also interviewed with a colleague of mine from the Australian National University. I interviewed 20 plus public servants at the federal level, Commonwealth government, on how they use empathy in their work. And so the core premise here is that so there are street level bureaucrats or people who work on the front line. Like, for example, in Kazakhstan, they work in ЦОН, right, in Центр обслуживания населения. Those people are at the front line. And so they're the ones we see when we come to a government office to receive a public service, a document, a license, etc., a welfare payment. And so those people, because we see them as people, we can see their body language, their facial expressions, and they can see ours. And so depending on how they see us and how they treat us as people, that will characterize our entire experience of the government, right? So that's kind of the institutional body language of the government. But then my question is, how is empathy used by people we do not see, people in the back office, or rather people in the core office, but who are not frontliners, right? Do they think about citizens? Do they empathize with the experiences of people who they never see because they don't work in the frontline office? And so this was informed by my experience in Australia when I just arrived, which was not super positive. When I came to register for the local healthcare system, where you're covered essentially, they have a universal healthcare system here, and then I was not treated very nicely. It's like I came to ask for money, and the person was like, "I'm doing you a favor by giving you your case number," and I was like, "I'm pretty sure you're not doing me a favor. It's your job." And then I was like, okay, if she's like that, I wonder what people who develop these policies are like, in the office in Canberra somewhere. And so the more I got exposed to all these different ways of thinking about policies in Australia and some of the theories that are used very natively here, again, I haven't had experience with them in Singapore, they struck me as, well, very reflective of what's going on, of the truth. And so that's what made me think about empathetic understanding of people that public servants may or may not have, may or may not use in their work. And so that is the core research program I'm engaged with right now. I've published 2 papers. I did a masterclass for the federal government here, about 500 people. And then I'm trying to turn this into a much, much bigger project, and then even turn it into a project that is tied to algorithmic decision making in the government in the future. So that's the topic of a major grant that I am applying for. And a couple of theories that I'm using. One is social license to operate, which is essentially that trust that citizens show to the government and the policies that the government is implementing by saying, okay, we accept this policy. And again, in the experience that I have, I supervised a group of students. This was an extremely interesting project. So Australia, Australia has a unique flora and fauna. And so it does quite a lot of culling of wild animals. And so they have these wild horses here that the population, they need to cull, otherwise they start becoming pests. And so some communities in Australia, especially in rural areas, do not want these horses to be culled. And so they abuse the government staff who are tasked with this. And so the idea is basically how do you secure the social license to operate for policies like that? And my idea is that you can use empathy to understand, what do people want? When they are against the culling of the horses, what do they want? Because there is something. It's not just we don't want the horses to die. It's probably something like, we want you to hear us and understand what we want before you do something, right? And then another one is empathy as a sense-making resource, which is a core concept in organizational studies that is currently under review in one of the journals. And so this is something I'm trying to see, theorize the role of empathy in government work. That's kind of it. I think I'm not going to bore you to death with the other details of my research. What I would do instead is I'll see if you have any questions. And thank you so much for your time. Please let me know if you're interested in anything I've said and reach out to me. My email address is on my institutional profile. And thank you so much for having me.
Asel, really appreciate your slides, amazingly prepared, very thoroughly. Yeah, again, yeah, you telling about this social servant experience. I also recall my here in Germany, like German government trying to invite all, let's say, talents around the world. But when you coming here, like immigration office treating you like like you say, okay, I'm not speaking German, but they continuously speaking to you German, even they know English.
Right, right.
Yeah, and a lot of painful experience for a lot of foreigners. It's like this immigration office, Ausland before everyone. So we also was thinking, yeah, who is sitting beside of these people, yeah, behind of these people. I think it very makes sense. I said I have a question. Very interesting research topic, and how you came up to this topic, especially empathy and governmental work. Is it was your, let's like, can you more elaborate about how you came to this topic actually? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kalamjan. That is a good question. So when I first got to Australia in July 2023, what what I witnessed firsthand was this fallout from this massive scandal in the government, in the federal government. And so what happened is, um, in 2017 or thereabouts, the government started to use this income matching mechanism for welfare recipients. So what they did is they had this um, sort of instrument where they would calculate the average income of a person, and then they will compare it to the welfare payments that the person has received, and then they will see that the person has received too many welfare payments, too much money from welfare, even though their income is quite high. And then they would send a debt notice to the person saying, you owe us this much because we've calculated it using our algorithm. So what happened is the algorithm was found to be illegal and wrong because it was averaging income out based on wrong data, because people usually who work and also receive welfare payments, they do not have regular incomes. So one week they receive more money and then another week they receive a lot less money. And so the averaging was wrong. And so sometimes people would receive thousands of dollars in debt notices that they couldn't pay, that they did not owe. And so there were a few suicides, there were lots of legal cases. And so one of the things that was said by the top public servant, which is kind of our head of Agency of Civil Service Affairs, was that there was no empathy in people who employed this mechanism. And I was like, okay, that's a nice thing to say, but what does that even mean, you know?
Mhm.
And so that's why I thought, okay, if nobody knows what it means, then I will ask Australian public servants, how do you use empathy? Or what does it even mean to you? And so that was how I kind of arrived at this question. And yeah, and then I went to Centrelink, which is what Torn is here, and then they were like, that treated me the way they treated me. And I thought, okay, I'm on the right track.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Asel. Yeah, that's a way how to start the research question and project. Asel, another follow-up question from Mahbal. So Mahbal mainly concerning about Kazakhstani system. So she's saying very interesting topics. Is there anything on your research about burnout? Since empathy in the
Hmm.
public service can clearly lead to burnout, specifically in Kazakhstan, overtime or high workload, especially in Kazakhstan, some public servants serve maybe handle more than 30 requests per day and stick in the time. So in this kind of circumstances, even more motivated employee can be burned out very quickly. Are there any protection for public servants in Australia against such as workload?
That is a great question. Thank you so much, Mokbal. That is very well informed as well. Yes, definitely. Empathy is also conceptualized as emotional labor. So it's basically
Mm,
that something you do, and that emotional labor, like an effort, it
mm,
can lead to burnout, especially if you do not protect yourself or you don't really know how to.
mm,
And so yes, people do burn out, and that is precisely what I'm trying to look at because individually, and I've spoken to quite a few people in one-on-one, but also the survey that we collected in New South Wales, that was 2,000 people, and we asked them an open-ended question about empathy. And quite a lot of them do have empathy, and that is especially true about people who work in family policy or welfare policy or any kind of social policy that is helping people in need. Individually, they have a lot of empathy. But institutionally speaking, the institutional structures are such that they prevent people from
mm,
channeling that empathy effectively because, well, there are no resources. If there are 30 requests per day, if this is something that you can't really handle, as one person, then it's really difficult to practice empathy and you just shut it off. And so I've seen this really good research from Denmark about street level bureaucrats who cannot use empathy precisely because they're overloaded, or sometimes because the clients they're helping, they're trying to help, are disappointing them in some way. They're cheating or they don't meet the requirements that are needed for the welfare payments, for example, in some way. I haven't gotten to the burnout part in my research yet because most people I interviewed were quite enthusiastic, and that I suppose is a self-selection bias.
mm,
But people definitely say that it depends on the leader. Some leaders are saying you should really treat, say, I don't know, ministerial correspondence, the letters that you receive from citizens, empathetically. And some people say, okay, you have a standard template, just use that. It does
mm,
depend on the person in charge. And so some people encourage that more and some people don't.
mm.
So I would definitely say it's a problem of resourcing. And again, it's a problem of institutional structures essentially overriding any individual propensities we have for kindness and for empathy towards people.
Yeah, definitely. This empathy is also like a kind of labor, as I mentioned. Thank you, Asel, for this insight. I hope it answered the question. So next one we have from Juldus.
Mhm.
Juldus, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If you guys have question in Kazakh, Russian, please go ahead. Juldus, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. It's regarding
Yeah,
your career choice in Australia. Thank you.
yeah. I mean, because my name is Juldis, and I'm also doing my PhD under Assel supervisor, ex-supervisor, Prof. Chungan. And the question is definitely. I mean, I'm so impressed by your presentation. This is the first time I'm listening listening to your speech. And this is just amazing, wonderful. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
there are a lot of things to discuss because me and my supervisor, we are always like discussing many, many things. And then I say, oh, Prof, we are so lucky. We are just have so much free time to discuss this kind of like strange things which are not so important in life. Like we really love to discuss like trust, institutional trust. We really love to discuss happiness index. And nowadays we started understanding that happiness comes from the appreciation, this kind of stuffs. And we really think about it and always like think what is right and what is wrong. And now I really I got very impressed by your new concept. I mean, not a new concept, but for me it was new from this. angle of an empathy, which is so amazing, you know. I mean, this is in policy making. I think it's a most of the people in Kazakhstan. My very close friend Gulnur Makulbayeva, who is working in, she was a Harvard scholar, and last time she told me that she was on in ASPA and was very impressed by your speech. Now I understand why. And then she was saying that in the Academy of the Public Admin in Kazakhstan, when she wanted to research happiness index and this kind of stuff, they were like really shocked. Like, why are you going to research this kind of unnecessary things? You know, this is just a very delusional, something very strange. But what I understand, these kind of very simple things such as happiness, trust, empathy, uh, uh, it's just the core of any public policy.
Mhm.
Yeah, now I start understanding. And the question is that because I am in Singapore at the moment, but I'm in Singapore. By the way, I'm in Singapore since 2015, just like yourself, huh? So the question is, what was the motivation for you to move to Australia? If it was a career motivation, why did you make this choice? I mean, of course, if it is personal, we cannot ask, but if it is a career.
Okay, thanks, Jules. I'm actually on Jules's thesis advisory committee. So, and I
Wow,
attended
wow.
her presentation a couple of weeks ago, and I was really, really impressed by your research, Jules, as well. I should really write you an email, but the start of the semester has been a bit crazy. So, thank you so much for your question. The motivations were not career, actually; they were personal.
Mm,
So, I am in Australia for personal reasons. Yes.
mm,
Um, Probably wouldn't have been my first choice if not that, not that people who are looking for jobs after completing their PhD have a choice. They will go where the jobs are. But I was specifically looking in Australia, and
mm,
I was is very specifically also looking in Sydney because I
mm.
needed to be in Sydney. And so I'm in Sydney, so that's great. It worked out. But it's a great place to work, I must say. I have nothing so far that I did not like in terms of the academic culture. Well, maybe people talking about themselves all the time. So yeah, that's probably the only
Absolutely.
one.
Thank you,
Thank
Asel.
you very
Thank you,
much.
Shuldas. Yeah, Asel, I also agree with you totally. This transition from Asian culture, working culture to Western. I've been more than 10 years in China and transferred to Germany, and this work-life balance, free time, borders. It's very much, I think, it's similar to Asian thing. Next, we have a question from Didar. Didar from University of Glasgow, PhD. So Didar, please go ahead.
Hello, Michelle. So currently it's morning in Scotland. So for you it's good evening. For us it's good morning. So as Ramza mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate awaiting my viva in 2 weeks' time. So fingers crossed. My question is, so during your presentation, by the way, which was very insightful, you mentioned that during your PhD time, you managed to publish 9 articles, which is really impressive, I would say, because some people cannot manage even one. So, can you share your strategies in how you managed to do that? Of course, you mentioned about the anxiety, which is part of PhD, I would say, but how did you manage to go with such a great number of publications? Was there a certain support from your supervisor? Was it something intrinsic in terms of motivation that was driving you?
Thanks so much, Dad, and good luck with your Viva. You're so close. Very happy for you.
Thank you.
So thanks for the question. I mean, honestly, quite a lot of it was just luck. And that luck was essentially from the fact that I was a research assistant for a professor while I was still doing my master's. And this professor gave me many, many opportunities. He later was on my thesis advisory committee, a professor from NUS. And so he was actually working on a project on Kazakhstan at the time when I was his research assistant. And that was partly also why he was interested in hiring me. Based on that research project, we wrote 2 articles. He also had data sets just lying around. And so he was like, do you want to write something using these data sets, using this data? And I was like, sure. And so I wrote something. And it took a long time to publish. But essentially, I kind of had a mini pipeline from year one, so of my PhD, right? So that was just luck. It just happened so because I met the right person at the right time. And then my PhD supervisor, also who is also a supervisor for Jules, he had some data from Taiwan that we used. We collaborated on 2 more papers. Then I wrote 1 more paper myself. I received a very generous stipend from Singapore government, so I didn't really have to work or anything too much. Although I did work as a research assistant still during my PhD, so I had a lot of free time to kind of just write stuff and try it out and send it here and there, and so it just worked out. It really wasn't because I was more intelligent or hardworking or intrinsically motivated than anyone else. It was just the opportunities presented themselves, and I did not say no, which is also important. Sometimes you say no because you doubt yourself, but I think it is important to say yes and then just work really hard and forget to sleep, etc. That never happened to me. I had a pretty chill time during my PhD. So yeah, all around, I think important to have those people who give you opportunities around you, which it doesn't always happen. I know that.
Asil,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you, Larissa.
Asil Rahmet, these are, by the way, great question. So I have another question. If anyone has question, please write in chat box or just raise your hand. So regarding, I said your publication. So as far as I know, there is a lot of Kazakhstani scholars, Dana Mumbayeva, Maral Muratbekova, professors, all of them, one in Paris, one in King's College London. Also, you mentioned Janelle, and you also in Australia, all of them doing some research related to Kazakhstan. And my question is like, first, uh, can you accept PhD students? This is the first, or masters under your supervision. And second, what kind of other research you doing related to Kazakhstan, or maybe projects, or supervising someone? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kalamjan. So in terms of the supervision, I cannot quite act as a primary supervisor yet because we have very strict institutional rules about that. So when you're a new academic, you need to supervise 2 PhD students as a secondary supervisor until they graduate internally. And then you can be primary supervisor after that, which is very strict, and it's not universal across, even within Australia. Some universities are just more strict. Like ANU, for example, they don't have that requirement. And so I am currently co-supervising 2 people, and then once they graduate, which for one of them does not seem likely because, yeah, for various reasons. But one of them hopefully will graduate soon, and then I just need to co-supervise another one before I can take on my students, which is not great because obviously you do want to start working with people and sort of developing your research agenda and being impactful through people, through other people, right? That's how you make impact also as a scholar. So master students, yes, we have a master in public policy, which is very good. It's one of the biggest degrees in public policy in Australia. And I supervise capstones and year-long thesis for master students. And then your second question on research on Kazakhstan, I do not currently have a major project because Saltanat and we published the article, and then after that we took a bit of a break to focus on other projects. But also Saltanat and I are currently wrapping up writing a book, an edited book on policy successes in Central Asia. And so that book will hopefully be published next year with Bristol University Press. In that book, we have contributions from 12 authors from Central Asia, some of them from overseas working on Central Asia, some of them from Central Asian countries themselves. And the angle is we describe policy successes rather than policy failures and analyze why. So we are very, very proud of that book project. We hope that it will become a useful teaching aid for faculty members in Central Asia who are looking for successful policy studies. So that's the project I'm sort of that is connected to Kazakhstan that is currently in my pipeline.
Great, because after talking with some scholars, they often mentioning they're doing pretty much research on Central Asia, even like an economics or management, and really outstanding work, which have published in very reputable journals as a main project, and even some of them using this Central Asia initiative to create some centricity within the university, which can help them to promote into associate professorship or full professorship. Because if university, let's say, interested in this kind of Central Asian studies or Central Asian something related to Central Asians, it might be something also for the career-wise. Yeah, just interesting to just small comment. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Do we have other questions, guys? Because we're almost over time, 4 minutes. I think, and I said already more than 10 p.m. in Australia. So if not, I want to say thank you, Vasil, Rahmet, for today, for joining. I think it was we had a speaker from Australia and a speaker like Asil, very much passionate about her research, and I think doing very successful career, and hope will continue in Australia. And we as an association, as a platform, always trying to connect successful Kazakhstani scholars abroad. And if you're interested in Asil work, please you can reach to her. And yeah, so I said, if you want to say something before we end, yeah. Floor is yours.
No, that's that. I think maybe I've said everything I had to say. Mostly just let me know if you need my help or, I don't know, advice on anything. Ask. My email is assel.mussagulova@sydney.edu.au. Again, it's on my institutional profile at the University of Sydney. And stay in touch if you're interested in anything. I'll do my best to help. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you, Asil. Appreciate it. See you guys. Have a good day.
Bye.
Good night. Bye, Asil.
See you.
Жақсы, рахмет. Сау болыңыздар.
Жақсы,
Sağ
сау
olun.
болыңыздар. Валихан, как поживаете? Как проект идет?